awakening. But awakening is the goal of all. It is a kind of psychotherapy, a kind of transformation of the consciousness of the everyday person, which is held to be a sleep, into a state of awakening, in which you might say he is so clearly conscious of reality that he is never fooled anymore by the illusions of life. Clearly conscious of reality that he is never fooled anymore by the illusions of life. Awakening.
Are you aware of the Kolbrin? It's the Egyptian texts of the bronze books. And the reason why they're called the bronze books is that because they are made out of copper and they were made during the Bronze Age. Thus, now you can see the connection. And you know, the interesting thing about the bronze books is that, well, they couldn't be burned. Our history is that, well, first we put it into stone. That's not exactly the easiest way to write a letter. Then clay tablets, and still that's, you know, burdensome to carry around. And then we came up with this whole thing with papyrus. And boy, that was really great because, you know, you could write on it and you actually could reuse it, and you could carry it around. It wasn't heavy. Only problem was, though, is that it did burn. And burn they did. So with the bronze books, well, again, they were made out of copper, and I have to hand it to the cats whoever came up with this brilliant idea that said, hey, why don't we take this sacred parchment that we have here and let's put it into something that we know that the Pope or the King will not destroy. All right, so the Kolbrin Bible is what it's known by, is not a biblical book in the sense, but it is one of the few manuscripts that survive about the time preceding the flood. And you know, there are some differences between the biblical accounts, specifically the Exodus, and the Kolbrin Bible, but there's also many interesting converging points on this. Background on this, again, it's an amalgamation of ancient secular academic works. It's from the Great Book, and it was written in heretic by Egyptian academics after the crossing. And the crossing is a real event. It's not made up. It's not, you know, a myth. It actually happened. It's going to happen again. And this took place around 1500 BCE. So much was happening in the world at that point. And when you get into the subject, particularly where you find out about the destroyer, there is so much is misunderstood. What we're talking about is a different take than your Bible, your Quran, your Vedic, your other books out there on creation, destructions, crossings, and rogue planets. So the question is a crossing coming? Well, I think the answer on that is, if there was one that happened to begin with, most likely there'll be another one. So in that context, the answer is a definitive yes. It just kind of depends on, you know, how you perceive that coming. That becomes the problem. You know, our species, we find ourselves again at a time of tremendous changes. And these changes, they're upon us again. We're pros at this, and how we have survived so many crossings in the past. As I said, the crossing has happened many times in Earth's history. We have eyes in the sky that we see it now. This just came out that a radio telescope, the astronomers monitoring that particular telescope have been watching. They just announced that they have discovered this brown dwarf. It's 12 times bigger than Jupiter. And here's the thing, folks. They say the magnetic fields on this puppy is something like we haven't ever seen before. Now, how odd that story just came out. And this graph, this picture that you see right here now, that little blue dot on the left, that's us, that's terra firma. The next one is Jupiter. The next one is the rendition of what Nibiru or Planet X would be. They nailed it. I don't know how they nailed it, but they did. I guess the question then becomes, is it in our solar system? Is it near our solar system? Other cultures throughout our written record, our pictorial record, have stated that the Earth has changed. It's tilted, it's flipped. So it kind of follows with what we see from, I call these messengers, written in stone. Here's a peculiar one. Shows our sun on the left, planet X, the destroyer. And then look at the dark star next to it. I think the question is, does the destroyer have a star? The Great Deluge has been attributed to a crossing. Makes just as good a sense as anything else. The pole shifts, of which Earth has had, have been attributed to the crossings. It's been known in many cultures as the destroyer. They told us that the best metaphor that they could give us was that it resembled a dragon. And they definitely warned us, should you see it, beware. So what did the Egyptians witness? It's said by those who witnessed the last crossing that the fire that came from the sky, which they called the breath of the destroyer, could consume a person before the flames ever were near you. That's hot. It is said that when it happened the first time, and apparently when it was written, and it will be again, that it will appear suddenly. Will take up 2/3 of the sky. We know that the asteroid belt was in fact a planet. Maybe 2, maybe 3. I do know this, our ancestors depicted the arrival. They left us records, many of them. They said, hey folks, this is real. And so we know, going back as far as the Sumerians, they wrote about this. Could this have been what the comet was that hit in 11,800 BCE? I don't know. I do know this. The sky is going to change. It's already changing. You and I will most likely witness one of the most dramatic changes that has been recorded by modern man. I present to you a few selections from the Kolbrin Bible. We will be talking about the destroyer, how the destroyer arrives, the crossing, and the prophecy and the warning. Woe unto those who face it. Chapter 3, The Destroyer, Part 1 from the Great Skull, the prophecy. Men forget the days of the destroyer. Only the wise know where it went and that it will return in its appointed hour. It raged across the heavens in the days of wrath, and this was its likeness. It was as a billowing cloud of smoke, enwrapped in a ruddy glow, not distinguishable in joint or limb. Its mouth was an abyss from which flame, smoke, and hot cinders came. When ages passed, certain laws operated upon the stars in the heavens. Their ways changed. There is movement and restlessness. There are no longer constant, and a great light appears readily in the skies. When blood drops upon the earth, the destroyer will appear, and mountains will open up and belch forth fire and ashes. Trees will be destroyed and all living things engulfed. Waters will be swallowed up by the land, and seas will boil. The heavens will burn brightly and redly. There will be a copper hue over the face of the land, followed by a day of darkness. A new moon will appear and break up and fall. The people will scatter in madness. They will hear the trumpet and the battle cry of the destroyer, and will seek refuge in the dens in the earth. Terror will eat away their hearts, and their courage will flow from them like water from a broken pitcher. They will be eaten up in the flames of wrath and consumed by the breath of the destroyer. Thus, in the days of heavenly wrath, which have gone, and thus it will be in the days of doom, when it comes again, the times of its coming and going are known unto the wise. These are the signs and times which shall precede the destroyer's return. 110 generations shall pass into the west, and nations will rise and fall. Men will fly in the air as birds and swim in the seas as fishes. Men will talk peace with one another. Hypocrisy and deceit shall have their day. Whoa. You know, that alone right there. And it gets, well, let's just continue. Women will be as men, and men as women. Passion will be a plaything of man. A nation of soothsayers shall rise and fall, and their tongue shall be speech learned. A nation of lawgivers shall rule the earth and pass away into nothingness. One worship will pass into the four quarters of the earth, talking peace and bringing war. A nation of the seas will be greater than any other, but will be as a rotten apple at the core, and will not endure. A nation of traitors will destroy men with wonders, and it shall have its day. Then shall the high strive with the low, the north with the south, the east with the west, and light with darkness. Men shall be divided by their races, and their children will be born as strangers among them. Brother shall strive with brother, husband with wife. Fathers will no longer instruct their sons, and their sons will be wayward. Women will become the common property of men, and will no longer be held in regard and respect. Now you tell me, does this sound like it could be written today? Now listen to this part. Then men will be ill at ease in their hearts. They will seek, they know not what, and uncertainty and doubt will trouble them. They will possess great riches, but be poor in spirit. Then will the heavens tremble and the earth move. Men will quake in fear, and while terror walks with them, the heralds of doom will appear. Whoa! They will come softly as thieves to the tombs. Men will know them not for what they are. Men will be deceived. The hour of the destroyer is at hand. In those days, men will have the great book before them. Wisdom will be revealed. The few will be gathered for the stand. It is the hour of trial. The dauntless ones will survive. The stout-hearted will not go down to destruction. The great God of all ages, alike to all, who sets the trials of man, be merciful to our children in the days of doom. Man must suffer to be great, but hasten not his progress unduly. In the great winnowing, be not too harsh on the lesser ones among men. Even the son of a thief has become your scribe. I'm telling you, you read this, it's as if it could be written for today. Chapter 4, The Destroyer. I continue. O sentinels of the universe, who watch for the destroyer, how long will your coming vigil last? O mortal men, who wait without understanding, where will you hide yourselves in the dread days of doom, when the heavens shall be torn apart and the skies rent in twain? In the days when children will turn gray-headed, this is the thing which will be seen. This is the terror your eyes will behold. This is the form of destruction that will smash upon you. There will be the great body of fire, the glowing head with many mouths and eyes ever-changing. Terrible teeth will be seen in formless mouths, and a fearful dark belly will glow redly from fires inside. Even the most stouted man will tremble, and his bowels will be loosened. For this is not a thing understandable to men. It will be a vast sky-spanning form, enwrapping the earth, burning with many hues within wide open mouths. These will descend to sweep across the face of the land, engulfing all in the yawning jaws. The greatest warriors will charge against it in vain. The fangs will fall out, and lo, they are terror-inspiring things of cold, hardened water. Great boulders will be hurled down upon men, crushing them into red powder. As the great salt waters rise up in its train, and roaring torrents pour towards the land, even the heroes among mortal men will be overcome with madness. As moths fly swiftly to their doom in the burning flame, so will these men rush to their own destruction. The flames going before will devour all the works of men. The waters following will sweep away whatever remains. The dew of death will fall softly as gray carpet over the cleared land. Men will cry out in their madness, "Oh, whatever being there is, save us from this tall form of terror. Save us from the gray dew of death." Chapter 5, The Destroyer, Part 3. The doom shape, called the Destroyer in Egypt, was seen in all the lands whereabouts. In color, it was bright and fiery, in appearance changing and unstoppable. It twisted about itself like a coil, like water bubbling into a pool from an underground supply. And all men agree it was the most fearsome sight. It was not a great comet or a loosened star, but being more like a fiery body of a flame. Its movements on high were slow. Below it swirled in the manner of smoke, and it remained close to the sun, whose face it hid. There was a bloody redness about it, which changed as it passed along its course. It caused death and destruction in its rising and setting. It swept the earth with gray cinder rain and caused many plagues, hunger, and other evils. It bit the skin of men and beasts until they became molded with sores. The earth was troubled and shook. The hills and mountains moved and rocked. The dark smoke filled heavens, bowed over earth, and a great howl came to the ears of men, borne to them upon the wings of the wind. It was the cry of the dark Lord, the master of dread. Thick clouds of fiery smoke passed before him, and there was an awful hail of hot stones and coals of fire. The doom shape thundered sharply in the heavens and shot out bright lightnings. The channels of waters were turned back unto themselves when the land tilted, and great trees were tossed about and snapped like twigs. Then a voice like 10,000 trumpets was heard over the wilderness, and before its burning breath the flames parted. The whole of the land moved, and mountains melted. The sky itself roared like 10,000 lions in agony, and bright arrows of blood sped back and forth across its face. Earth swelled up like bread upon the hearth. This was the aspect of the doom shape called the Destroyer, when it appeared in the days long gone by in olden times. It is thus described in the old records. Few of them remain. It is said that when it appears in the heavens above, earth splits open from the heat like a nut roasted before a fire. Then flames shoot up through the surface and leap about like fiery fins upon black blood. The moisture inside the land is all dried up. The pasture and cultivated places are consumed in flames, and they and all trees become white ashes. The doom shape is like a circling ball of flame, which scatters small, fiery offspring in its train. It covers about a fifth part of the sky and sends withering snake-like fingers down to earth. Before it, the sky appears frightened, and it breaks up and scatters away. Midday is no brighter than night. It spawns a host of terrible things. These are things said of the Destroyer in the old records. Read them with a solemn heart, knowing that the doom shape has its appointed time and will return. It would be foolish to let them go unheeded. Now men say such things are not destined for our days. May the great God above grant this to be so. But come, the day surely will, and in accordance with his nature, man will be unprepared. Chapter 6, The Dark Days. The dark days began with the last visitation of the Destroyer, and they were foretold by strange omens in the sky. All men were silent and went about with pale faces. The leaders of the slaves, which had built a city to the glory of Pharaoh, stirred up unrest, and no man raised his arm against them. They foretold great events of which the people were ignorant, and of which the temple seers were not informed. These were days of ominous calm, when the people waited, for they knew not what. Sound familiar? Yeah. The presence of an unseen doom was felt. The hearts of men were stricken. Laughter was heard no more, and grief and wailing sounded throughout the land. Even the voices of children were stilled, and they did not play together, but stood silent. The slaves became bold and insolent, and women were the possession of any man. Fear walked the land, and women became barren with terror. They could not conceive, and those with child aborted. All men closed up within themselves. The days of stillness were followed by a time when the noise of trumpeting and shrilling was heard in the heavens, and the people became as frightened beasts without a herdsman, as asses when lions prowl without their fold. The people spoke of the God of the slaves, and reckless men said, "If we knew where this God were to be found, we would sacrifice to him." But the God of the slaves was not among them. He was not to be found within the swamplands or in the brick pits. His manifestation was in the heavens for all men to see, but they did not see with understanding. Nor would any God listen, for all were dumb because of the hypocrisy of men. The dead were no longer sacred and were thrown into waters. Those already entombed were neglected, and many became exposed. They laid unprotected against the hands of thieves. He who once toiled long in the sun, bearing the yoke himself, now possessed oxen. He who grew no grain now owned a storehouse full. He who once dwelt at ease among his children now thirsted for water. He who once sat at the sun with crumbs and dregs were now bloated with food. He reclined in the shade, his bowels overflowing. Cattle were left unattended to roam into strange pastures, and men ignored their marks and slew the beast of their neighbors. No man owned anything. The public records were cast forth and destroyed, and no man knew who were slaves and who were masters. The people cried out to the Pharaoh in their distress, but he stopped his ears and acted like a deaf man. There were those who spoke falsely before Pharaoh and had gods hostile towards the land. Therefore the people cried out for their blood to appease it. But it was not these strange priests who put strife in the land instead of peace. For one was even of the household of Pharaoh and walked among the people unhampered. Dust and smoke clouds darkened the sky, colored the waters upon which they fell with a bloody hue. Plague was throughout the land. The river was bloody and blood was everywhere. The water was vile and men's stomachs shrank from drinking. Those who did drink from the river vomited it up, for it was polluted. The dust tore wounds in the skin of men and beast. In the glow of the destroyer, the earth was filled with redness. Vermin bred and filled the air and face of the earth with loathsomeness. Wild beasts, afflicted with torments under the lashing sand and ashes, came out of their lairs in the wastelands and cave places and stalked the abodes of men. All tame beasts whimpered, and the land was filled with the cries of sheep and the moans of cattle. Trees throughout the land were destroyed, and no herb or millet was to be found. The face of the land was battered and devastated by hailstones, which smashed down all that stood in the path of the torrent. They swept down in hot showers, and strange flowing fire ran along the ground in their wake. The fish of the river died in the polluted water. Worms, insects, and reptiles sprang up from the earth in huge numbers. Great gust of wind brought swarms of locusts, which covered the sky. As the destroyer flung itself through the heavens, it blew great gusts of cinders across the face of the land. The gloom of the long night spread a dark mantle of blackness, which extinguished every ray of light. None knew when it was day and when it was night, for the sun cast no shadow. The darkness was not the clean blackness of night, but a thick darkness in which the breath of men was stopped in their throats. Men gasped in hot clouds of vapor, which enveloped all the land and snuffed out all lamps and fires. Men were benumbed and lay moaning in their beds. None spoke to one another or took food, for they were overwhelmed with despair. Ships were sucked away from their moorings and destroyed in great whirlpools. It was a time of undoing. The earth turned over as clay spun upon a potter's wheel. The whole land was filled with uproar from the thunder of the destroyer overhead and the cry of the people. There, as the sound of moaning and lamentations on every side, the earth spewed up its dead. Corpses were cast up out of their resting places, and the embalmed were revealed to the sight of all men. Pregnant women miscarried, and the seed of men was stopped. The craftsman left his task undone. The potter abandoned his wheel, and the carpenter his tools, and they departed to dwell in the marshes. All crafts were neglected, and the slaves lured the craftsmen away. The dues of Pharaoh could not be collected, for there was neither wheat nor barley, goose nor fish. The rights of Pharaoh could not be enforced, for the fields of grain and the pastures were destroyed. The highborn and the lowly prayed together, that this might come to an end, and the turmoil and the thundering cease to beat upon their ears. Terror was the companion of men by day, and horror their companion by night. Men lost their senses and became mad. They were distracted by frightfulness. On the great night of the destroyer's wrath, when its terror was at its height, there was a hail of rocks, and the earth heaved as pain rent her bowels. Gates, columns, and walls were consumed by fire, and the statutes of gods were overthrown and broken. People fled outside their dwellings in fear and were slain by the hail. Those who took shelter from the hail were swallowed when the earth split open. The habitations of men collapsed upon those inside, and there was panic on every hand. But the slaves who lived in huts in the reed lands, at the place of pits, were spared. The land burnt like tinder. A man watched upon his rooftops, and the heavens hurled wrath upon him, and he died. The land withered under the wrath of the destroyer and groaned with the agony of Egypt. It shook itself, and the temples and palaces of the nobles were thrown down from their foundations. The high